right, so are you ready for this? We're diving into a debate that's been kind of a big deal in Christianity for a long time now, and that is, the whole thing about the timing of the rapture, specifically how it all lines up with the tribulation. That super intense period of global turmoil that the Bible talks about. We've got a whole bunch of sources here, and I gotta say, they seem to be leaning pretty heavily towards one side. But don't worry, we're gonna make sure we look at both sides of this thing. Give them both a fair shake so you can make up your own mind,
Yeah, it's a really interesting debate, and honestly, it goes way beyond just dates on a calendar. It really gets to the core of how Christians, different groups of Christians, view things like suffering, God's protection, and ultimately what it means to be ready for whatever's coming next.
Exactly. That's what makes it so fascinating to me. Now, I know some folks listening might not be totally up on all the lingo, so just to be clear, the rapture is this belief that Jesus is going to come back, and he's going to take all the believers, the Christians, up to heaven with him. And then you've got the tribulation, which is often described as this time of major, major hardship, like chaos on earth, basically. So the big question is, when does the rapture happen in relation to all of that? Does it happen before, during, or after the tribulation?
Yeah, and from what I'm seeing in these sources, it seems like a lot of folks are leaning towards the before camp, the pre-tribulation rapture.
Right. They make a pretty strong case for it, too. One of the sources really digs into 1 Thessalonians 4.16-17, which paints this really vivid picture, you can almost see it, of the Lord descending from heaven and then all the believers rising up to meet him in the air.
It's a powerful image for sure.
Talk about a dramatic exit, right?
Yeah, definitely captures the imagination. And it really plays into that idea of continual readiness. That idea that you should live every day as if Christ could return at any moment.
He could just show up, bam, right now.
Exactly. Makes you think, doesn't it? What would you change about your life? If you really truly believe that today could be the day.
I'd probably eat that extra slice of cake just in case. No, but seriously, it's a thought-provoking question. It really challenges you to examine your priorities, your relationships, everything.
Yeah, it's not just about being whisked away to heaven. It's about living a life that reflects that anticipation, that hope. And honestly, that can have a huge impact on how we treat others, how we spend our time, even how we view the world around us.
So even if you're not totally sold on the whole pre-tribulation thing, that idea of being ready, of continual readiness, there's some pretty universal wisdom in that, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. But of course, like you said, there's another side to this whole thing, the post-tribulation perspective, which basically says that believers are going to go through the tribulation.
Yeah, that's where things start to get really interesting for me, because now it's not just about a timeline. It's about resilience, about having a faith that can withstand intense pressure.
Right. And the sources that lean towards this view often point to Matthew 24.29-1, where Jesus talks about gathering his elect after the tribulation. And some scholars argue that this passage actually suggests a different kind of preparation, one that's focused on inner strength and perseverance, not just escaping hardship, but enduring it.
So instead of packing your bags for a quick trip to heaven, you're building an emotional and spiritual bunker, right?
Exactly. And honestly, that resonates with a lot of people, especially those who've faced real adversity in their lives. There's this sense that going through tough times, even if it's part of some big cosmic plan, can actually deepen your faith, refine it in a way that just wouldn't be possible otherwise.
It's like the difference between reading about a fire and actually walking through one. You come out the other side changed.
Exactly. And that's what I think is so powerful about the post-tribulation view. It makes us ask this question. What if hardship isn't something to be avoided at all costs? What if it's actually an opportunity for growth, for becoming more resilient, more deeply rooted in our faith?
It's definitely a question that makes you stop and think. And what's fascinating to me is that even though these two viewpoints seem so different on the surface, they both seem to be getting at the same core message. Be prepared.
You got it. It's like two sides of the same coin, each offering a different way of looking at this idea of spiritual preparedness.
Okay, so we've got the pre-tribulation folks emphasizing that continual readiness, living like Jesus could come back any second. And then we've got the post-tribulation folks emphasizing inner strength, resilience, that ability to weather any storm. It seems like both perspectives are ultimately urging us to, take our faith seriously, to really live it out in a way that matters.
Exactly. And that brings us to one of the most well-known parables about preparedness, the parable of the 10 virgins. You familiar with that one?
Oh, absolutely. 5 wise virgins, 5 foolish ones, all waiting for the bridegroom to arrive. The wise ones have their lamps full of oil, ready to go, and the foolish ones are left scrambling in the dark.
And what's so interesting about this parable is that it doesn't actually take sides in this whole rapture timing debate. It simply emphasizes how important it is to be personally prepared, regardless of when that big event actually happens.
It's not about being on the right side of the timeline. It's about having your own spiritual house in order.
Exactly. And that, I think, is a message that speaks to anyone, no matter what they believe. We all face challenges in life, unexpected storms, moments where our faith is tested, and it's in those moments that our preparation, or lack of preparation, really comes into focus.
So whether you're team pre-tribulation, team post-tribulation, or somewhere in between, the message is clear. Get your lamp filled. Be ready.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And that actually leads to another fascinating question that the sources raise. What does that preparation look like in practical terms? How do we actually fill our lamps, so to speak, and get ready for whatever's ahead?
That is a great question. And it's one that we're definitely going to dive into as we continue this deep dive. But before we get into all the nitty-gritty of spiritual preparedness, I think it's important to acknowledge that these different perspectives on the rapture, they can have a really big impact on people emotionally.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the idea of going through a period of intense global turmoil like the tribulation, that can evoke fear and anxiety, even for the most devout believer.
Yeah, it's heavy stuff.
And on the other hand, the hope of being rescued from all that hardship, of being like whisked away to safety before things get really bad, that can be a source of incredible comfort and security.
Like 2 totally different coping mechanisms, each offering a different way of dealing with all the uncertainty of the future. But you know what strikes me? Both perspectives ultimately point to this deep longing for something beyond ourselves, for a source of strength and hope that can help us get through tough times. And that's something I think we can all relate to, whether we're religious or not.
I totally agree. It's that basic human need for connection, for meaning, for something to hold on to when the world feels like it's spinning out of control. And whether that something is a belief in a pre-tribulation rapture, a faith that can withstand tribulation, or just a deep-seated hope for a better tomorrow, it's a powerful force, one that shapes our lives in really profound ways.
All right, well, we've covered a lot of ground here in part 1. We've explored the biblical basis for both pre- and post-tribulation views, touched on the emotional impact of these beliefs, and highlighted that overarching message of preparedness that seems to be a common thread in both perspectives. But there's still so much more to unpack.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We've only just scratched the surface.
In part 2, we're going to be delving deeper into the practical implications of these beliefs, exploring what it actually means to live a life of continual readiness, or to cultivate that inner strength and perseverance. You know, the kind that can help us navigate those challenging times. So stay tuned, folks. We'll be right back after a quick break to continue our deep dive into this fascinating world of the rapture timing debate.
Come, Lord, please, come take me.
It's kind of wild how these different ideas about when the rapture is going to happen really affect how people live their lives.
Totally. Like if you think it's pre-tribulation, you're pretty much always on the lookout, right? Waiting for that trumpet call, ready to be swept away at any second.
Right. One of the sources even compared it to the early Christians who were persecuted. They were always aware that they might be killed for their faith, called home to God in an instant.
Wow, that makes you think about it in a whole new way. It's not just about getting away from hardship. It's about being so focused on your relationship with God that you're ready for anything, even death.
Exactly. And that can make you live your life with real purpose, focused on what truly matters. There's this quote from a pastor in one of the sources. He said, "If you knew you were leaving on a trip tomorrow, you wouldn't waste today on trivial things."
That's such a good way to put it. It makes you think about how you spend your time, your energy, everything. Are we putting our effort into things that will last? Or just getting caught up in the day-to-day stuff?
It's a question everyone has to ask themselves, I think, no matter what they believe about the rapture. But the pre-tribulation view definitely makes it feel more urgent.
Yeah, like there's a deadline you can't see, but, is out there somewhere.
Right. But then on the flip side, you've got the post-tribulation idea, which is all about endurance, that inner strength to stand strong even when everything's falling apart.
And that's where all those sources about spiritual resilience come in.
Exactly. They talk about building a solid foundation of faith, a deep trust in God, the kind of trust that can carry you through anything.
It's not about pretending things will be easy. It's about having the strength to face the hard stuff with courage and hope.
Right, and that idea really connects with a lot of people, especially nowadays, when you see so much conflict and disaster on the news every day. It's like, we know tough times are coming, so how do we get ready for them? Mentally and spiritually, I mean.
Yeah, it's a big question.
One source used this analogy of an athlete training for a marathon. They don't just show up on race day and hope for the best. They put in the work, the discipline to build up their endurance.
I love that. It's like a reminder that faith isn't passive. It's something you have to work at. It takes effort to grow and become stronger.
Exactly. And that's what the post-tribulation view really seems to emphasize. We're not just waiting around to be rescued. We're actively beating our spiritual strength.
So even though these timelines are different, both views agree that you have to be proactive with your faith. Whether it's living with urgency or building inner strength, it's about taking responsibility for your spiritual journey.
And that takes us back to that parable of the 10 virgins. Remember, it's not enough to just have oil in your lamp. You got to be smart with it. Make sure you have enough to last.
Right. It's about making good choices, putting your relationship with God first, and focusing on things that will help you through difficult times.
And that's where those sources on spiritual disciplines are really helpful. They talk about things like prayer, Bible study, spending time with other Christians, helping others. These are all ways to fill our lamps and get ready for whatever's coming.
It's like those things aren't just chores. They're what keep our faith strong.
Yeah.
Even when things are really tough.
Exactly. It's about focusing on how you live today, not on trying to figure out when the future is going to happen.
It's like we don't get to decide when the rapture is, but we do get to decide how we prepare for it, how we live out our faith day by day.
You got it. And honestly, that's something everyone can relate to no matter what they believe.
Yeah, for sure.
And another thing that's interesting is that both viewpoints talk a lot about the importance of community, of being there for each other on this journey.
Like we're not supposed to go through this alone.
Exactly. One source even called the church a training ground for the tribulation, a place to learn how to depend on each other, help each other, and grow in faith together.
We need each other.
Right. And that idea of helping others is something you see in both pre- and post-tribulation writings. This idea that we're called to be a light in the darkness, to offer hope and support to those who are struggling, to be strong for one another.
We're all in this together, no matter what happens in the future.
And that feeling of unity, of shared purpose, it can be really powerful, especially when things are uncertain or scary. It's like knowing you're not alone in the storm.
It's a beautiful message, and one that gets at the heart of what it means to be a Christian.
Definitely.
It's about love, compassion, and sticking together when things get tough.
And you know, another thing that both sides seem to agree on is that suffering can actually change us for the better. Of course, it's not something to seek out or glorify, but it can make us grow, deepen our faith, and make us better people.
That's where the post-tribulation view is really powerful. It doesn't shy away from the hard stuff, from the fact that following Jesus doesn't always mean an easy life.
Right. One source even compared it to a diamond being formed. It takes intense heat and pressure to bring out the diamond's beauty and shine.
What a great image. It's like our faith gets stronger when we go through hard times. The challenges we face, they can actually make us more resilient, more beautiful in God's eyes.
And that's a message that can give people hope when they're struggling. It's a reminder that even in the darkest times, you can still grow. You can change for the better and find a deeper meaning in life.
This has been such an amazing conversation. We've talked about so much. The different timelines for the rapture, what it means to live out your faith actively, the importance of community, and how suffering can actually make you stronger. But I feel like we've only just scratched the surface.
You're telling me. There's still so much more to explore.
We could talk for hours.
We could, but I think it's time to shift gears a little and talk about how all of this affects us on a psychological level. Because let's be real, the idea of a global tribulation, whether you're escaping it or going through it, that can bring up a lot of emotions.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to talk about those emotions, to explore how these different views of the rapture might shape our fears, our hopes, and our anxieties about the future. So let's take a deep breath and dive into that next.
It's pretty wild to think about all the emotions that must come up when you really believe in the rapture and the tribulation. Like, can you imagine that mix of fear and excitement? If you really thought the world was heading for such a crazy time, it's definitely a lot to process, that's for sure. And the sources we've been looking at, they touch on this a bit when they talk about the importance of getting ready, not just practically, but emotionally and spiritually too.
Yeah, one article used this phrase, emotional resilience. I thought that was really interesting. Like, how do you even begin to build up that kind of strength? The kind that can handle not just physical hardship, but the mental and spiritual strain of living in a world that feels like it's falling apart.
It's a good question. It goes way beyond just stocking up on food and supplies or learning how to survive in the wilderness. It's about finding that inner peace, that hope that can help you get through anything.
I think that's where these two perspectives we've been talking about, they offer some really valuable insights. For people who believe in the pre-tribulation rapture, that idea of being rescued before things get really bad, that can be a huge comfort.
Totally. Like having a safety net, knowing there's a safe place waiting for you when things get too overwhelming. For some people, that belief gives them a sense of peace, helps them deal with all the uncertainty in the world.
But then you have the post-tribulation view, where the idea is that you're going to go through the tribulation. You're going to face those challenges head on, and that takes a whole different kind of strength, don't you think?
Oh, definitely. It's less about avoiding the storm and more about learning to weather it.
Easier said than done, right?
For sure. Especially when you think about all the suffering and hardship that people associate with the tribulation.
It's heavy stuff. One source even quoted a theologian who said that the post-tribulation view requires a faith that's not afraid to look suffering in the eye and say, "You will not break me."
Wow, that's powerful. It really speaks to that idea of resilience. That inner strength that you build when you go through tough times. It's like the post-tribulation perspective recognizes that life isn't always going to be easy. That there will be times when your faith is really tested, when you have to dig deep and find the strength to keep going.
And I think that message speaks to a lot of people, even those who aren't necessarily religious. We all had to face challenges in life, times when we had to find a strength we didn't even know we had. And in a way, that's what the post-tribulation view is all about. It's about that human ability to overcome adversity.
Yeah, it's like a different kind of hope. Not the hope of escaping hardship, but the hope of being able to get through it and coming out on the other side stronger with a deeper faith.
And that's what I find so fascinating about how these beliefs affect us psychologically. It's not just about when the rapture happens. It's about how those beliefs shape our mindset, how we deal with our emotions, and how we handle the challenges that life throws at us.
You know, one source even connected it to the idea of post-traumatic growth, which is basically this idea that people can actually change for the better after going through something really traumatic or difficult.
That's a really interesting connection. So maybe the post-tribulation view, while acknowledging how hard the tribulation would be, it's also saying that there's potential for growth and transformation within that experience. It's not about wanting to suffer, but recognizing that suffering can actually make your faith stronger.
Exactly. It's like that saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And while I don't want to downplay the very real pain that people go through, I think there's some truth to that idea. That even in the darkest times, there's a chance for growth, for resilience, for finding a deeper meaning in life.
And what strikes me is that both the pre-tribulation and the post-tribulation views, even though they offer different kinds of comfort, they both come back to that same basic human need, the need for hope. Whether it's the hope of being rescued or the hope of finding the strength to endure, it's that little spark of light that keeps us going when things get tough.
It's like a beacon in the distance, guiding us through the storm. And maybe that's the most important thing to remember. No matter what we believe about the rapture or the tribulation, we all need something to hold on to, something to give us hope, to remind us that even when everything seems chaotic and uncertain, there's still beauty and goodness in the world.
Beautifully said. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive into the rapture timing debate.
It's been quite a journey.
We've explored the Bible, talked about theology, and really thought about what all of this means on a personal level. We've covered a lot, from the biblical arguments for both pre- and post-tribulation views, to how those beliefs affect our lives and the emotions that come with them. And while we haven't answered every question, because let's be real, some questions are meant to stay with us, we've hopefully sparked some curiosity, challenged some assumptions, and maybe even inspired you to explore your own faith a little deeper.
And if there's one thing we want you to take away from all of this, it's to be prepared, not just for the rapture or the tribulation, but for life itself. Build your relationship with God, strengthen your faith, find your community, and hold on to that hope that will carry you through anything.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. And remember, the conversation doesn't end here. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep seeking truth in your own way.
No more to roam, heaven is calling, guiding me home.